Good afternoon to our viewers in Germany and good morning to our viewers in the United States. Hello, I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'd like to welcome you to our weekly Kaffeepause. Today we're joined by Anja Wehler-Schoeck. She is based in Berlin, where she serves as the international editor at the German daily Der Tagesspiegel. Anja, herzlich willkommen. It's great to have you back again.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's always a pleasure to join you for Kaffeepause.
Well, I'm looking forward to our conversation today, and as usual, there's a lot to talk about. It's great to see you on this Monday after a three-day weekend in Germany to commemorate the 35th anniversary of German unification. I'd like to maybe start by asking you to share with us your take on the general mood in Germany, particularly after the holiday over the weekend. There was a survey that was released last week by Forza that talked about how fragile the sense of unity was. But the Tagesspiegel also had a survey that was just released on the 2nd of October about the mood in the country. Why don't you share some of those results and some of your own sort of personal observations?
Yeah, thank you so much, Steve. Yeah, indeed. Last week, Tagesspiegel published a survey with the polling institute Cive, and what struck me most was that roughly 60% in the West and in the East said that they're content with their life situation. I thought that was fairly positive, that both parts of the country are generally happy, satisfied with their situation in life, and it's about a quarter in each part that is not satisfied with their situation. And I what's also striking is that people feel that the situation is still unequal after 35 years, and people feel so much more strongly in the eastern part of Germany. About 72% feel that their circumstances in life are unequal to those living in West Germany, and that's certainly telling. And it's also evident because if you look at how wages have developed, wages in Eastern Germany are still lower, about 17% on average, than in the West. So there is evidence to support that sentiment. And it's also interesting when you look at where people see that German unity has been most successful, because infrastructure is the top performer, and social cohesion is the lowest performer. So only 2% of people living in East Germany feel that social cohesion has successfully been managed, and that's too low, and that's very regrettable. And I think we'll talk about the celebration for the Day of German Unity, and it was evidence that no high-level representative from East Germany spoke at that party.
So exactly, we'll get to that in just a second. I guess one question I have first about the survey, you mentioned that more than 70% of those surveyed in the East believe that things are unequal 35 years after German unification. Is there a number for the West as well? You said that there's a sense of things not being equal in East and West, but that this is felt even more strongly in the East. What's the percentage in the West?
Well, so the question that Sevi asked was, do you believe that East and West Germany have equal circumstances or living standards today? And 72% in the East said no, and 38% in the West said no. So 49% in the West believe that there are indeed equal standards of living today in East and West Germany.
And so I mean, I guess this is sort of interesting that even this long after German unification, there is a very different perception in both parts of Germany. Yet, as you indicated, there are some tangible factors that contribute to the inequities that exist, like the fact that wages are so much lower in the East for the same work as in the West.
Yes, and then there are social factors that contribute to the fact many East Germans, for example, listed that there are many stereotypes and much prejudice in the West when it comes to people from East Germany, and also much ignorance about life in East Germany and about the GDR. And so, yes, it is regrettable that when it comes to cultural and social um, uh, growing together, there is still a way to go.
Mhm. So there was, of course, a big celebration of the 30 or occasion marking the 35th anniversary of German unification, and this took place. I guess the official celebrations took place in Saarbrücken from October 2nd to October 4th. The reason why this took place there is because because the Saarland is the federal state that currently holds the presidency of the Bundesrat. And so, it made sense to do this in the West. But I think that there were a lot of people that might have been sort of scratching their heads that on this occasion, on a round celebration, if you will, there wasn't sort of a nod to the East and a major celebration in the East as well. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the festivities and some of your thoughts about it? Of course, there was a very special guest from abroad who was there as well. But I'd love to hear sort of your take on the event.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, it took place in Saarland on the border with France, and Saarland does, of course, historically have immensely close ties with France. So it's not surprising that they invited as the guest of honor the French President Emmanuel Macron to speak, and of course, the French-German relationship is a key pillar of post-World War II peace in Europe and European progress and integration. However, as you mentioned in your question, it would have been such an important nod to East and West Europe growing together after the fall of the wall and the new importance of close cooperation between Western and Eastern European countries. So at least I would have hoped for a guest speaker from Poland, for example, to celebrate also the Weimar Triangle, the cooperation between Germany, France, and Poland. And the most prominent critic was former Chancellor Merkel. She said it was very regrettable that not a single person from Eastern Europe or East Germany spoke, and she got a little bit of pushback. And some of the organizers called it extremely offensive and historically blind, which I think while Emmanuel Macron is of course someone who is important for Germany for the French-German relationship, it would have been an important sign to have someone speak from Eastern Europe, maybe in addition, not instead of Emmanuel Macron.
Mhm. I mean, of course, Friedrich Merz has made it a large priority to shore up the relationship with France, but also with Poland. And this is, obviously a sign of closer collaboration and communication between the two leaders. Macron is finding himself as of today in a completely new crisis, although his government has been in crisis for months at this point. I woke up today to the news that his that Macron's newly named prime minister, who was named a month ago, so, Sébastien Lecornu, had stepped down less than 24 hours after he formed his cabinet. So France is sort of roiling with internal strife. Were you surprised at how quickly this new government fell apart and with what's going on in France right now?
I was when I saw the news. I thought I misread, and then it kept popping up on as an alert on all my news channels. And I mean, on the one hand, it's understandable because the cabinet that Le Cornu presented was quite similar to the previous cabinet. And of course, the left was extremely dissatisfied. On the other hand, it's at such a dangerous moment that France needs to have a government. Europe needs France to be stable, and for Macron now, I think to find the sixth prime minister in 2 years, is it? It is of course a disaster, and it shakes the much needed trust that people need to have in political institutions, and gives a lot of power to those trying to sow polarization, trying to influence people through disinformation and propaganda. And of course, the right is profiting from that. And I see three scenarios now for France. Either Macron maybe offers the prime minister post to someone from the left, which I guess would be an important sign. But on the other hand, there is in the conservative camp, there is much resistance to a prime minister from the left. Or he could call for new elections, or he could resign. And I think scenario 2 and 3 risk that the Rassemblement National with Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella will make significant gains and could turn out to be the strongest force.
I mean, there are calls, of course, for Macron to resign, and there are also calls for new elections. I think there's been sort of a critical point all along since the last election, which Macron called, which is the far left and the far right did, fairly well, but did not see the, their impact reflected in the new cabinet that Macron had put together. And I think that that's part of the pushback that we're seeing right now, that people feel like this new government of Macron is more of the same. And that's something that the left and the right have vowed not to allow. I think that Le Cornu, the new prime minister, basically said in his speech that people have to put the country before party, and had said it was virtually impossible to carry out the job because of the polarization, and because of the fact that there's not enough compromise or consensus. Um, you mapped out three possible scenarios. Macron's time is limited, of course. He cannot run again as president. Um, don't you think that he'll try to find a compromise candidate from the left?
I think it's the most likely scenario. I think it's also the safest scenario, and the one which will allow him to hold on to his position. And there are, of course, fundamental issues of dissent, because he has been trying to work on the enormous budget deficit that France has, and the left has made a very strong stance against any moves to limit social spending, for example. So those conflicts won't be going away. So
Mm.
the compromise will need to make sort of the impossible happen, find that path towards cutting the budget while preserving some of the spending po positions that are most important to the left.
And how closely is this political crisis in France being followed in Germany writ large, but in Berlin specifically?
Well, the German government was very quick to issue a statement that they're not concerned about political stability or that they're not concerned about political instability in France. I thought that was interesting to sort of send a message in the direction of Paris. Saying we've got your back, but of course it is a matter of concern. Germany needs a strong partner in France. When we're looking at Europe, where in the Czech Republic, Babiš won another leaning pro-Russian force, skeptical of some of the EU's most important projects, like supporting Ukraine. This is a dangerous time. So, of course, Germany and Europe can't have France being a shaky partner. So we need a stable government in Paris in order to move forward with the important projects that the EU needs to tackle right now.
Mhm. One of the other stories that has been getting a lot of headlines has been the sighting of drones over the airport in Munich. This has happened twice over the last few days, and it has raised the big question of how well prepared Germany is to defend against drones. It happens at the same time as the Oktoberfest itself is taking place and was closed because of a bomb threat. So there are lots of concerns about sort of civil defense in Germany. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the reaction to the drones and the way in which Germany's trying to position itself to respond in future?
hmm So, we've seen roughly 180 drone incidents this year, and you mentioned the most recent ones in Munich over the weekend. And so far, these drone incidents have not been a danger for human security. They were not armed drones. They're more spy or intelligence drones. But of course, when it leads to closing an airport or stopping flights for a certain amount of time, that causes significant economic damage if flights have to be canceled and passengers and cargo are stranded. And also, of course, there has been a tremendous increase in these drone incidents over the past few weeks, not only in Germany but in other NATO countries. And so Germany has been debating how to best proceed. For example, if these drones should be shot down, and there are a number of challenges. First of all, there's lack of sufficient and adequate technical equipment. And there's also the calculation of how risky is it to shoot down a drone when you think about the debris falling and causing harm to humans. And then, since Germany is a federal system, who's in charge, the national government or the individual states? And also, it's a question of competence, Ministry of Interior versus Ministry of Defense. And the Minister of Interior, Dobrindt, has said he would call for a bigger role of the German armed forces, the Bundeswehr. But of course, for historic reasons, the ability of the Bundeswehr to act within Germany itself is very limited. So, of course, this is a very contentious issue to talk about expanding the Bundeswehr's competence to act inside Germany. So yes, it's a major issue of concern. I would say it's the top issue today, and it was quite interesting to see because the Minister of the Interior, Dobrindt, had invited a number of his colleagues to Munich for the Munich meeting on migration, where they wanted to talk about asylum and immigration policy, but they ended up spending a lot of time talking about drones. And so there is a lot of push for closer European coordination uh, on tackling the drone issue.
That's right. I mean, I was going to ask you about this meeting that sort of got sidetracked because there were a number of other ministers of the interior from other European countries who were all in Munich to have this meeting, and it got sidelined because the ministers were then talking about drones and defending against drones. Did they still have time to talk about migration policy at all, or did that end up really taking the back seat to the discussion about drones and how to perhaps create greater European unity in addressing them?
They did still talk about immigration, and the commissioner from the EU, the Austrian Magnus Brunner, was there, for example. His mantra has been Europe needs to gain back control of immigration and not allow the perception by many people that Europe is um, the target of uncontrolled immigration. And one issue that was central to their meeting was the deportation um, uh, of migrants to third party countries, so countries that are not their country of origin. And this is, of course, new territory. The European Union is looking for partner countries. Italy recently signed an agreement with Albania on having asylum seekers stay in Albania while the cases are being tried. This is a very controversial issue. It's not something that has previously been done by EU countries, so it will remain to be seen whether this can also hold up against EU legislation in Italy, for example, Meloni's agreement, and its implementation was shot down repeatedly by the courts.
Anya, is there a sense of who's responsible for the drones? I think that's one of the other questions that's come up, and someone just submitted a question asking how the German media portrayal is and whether it's clear that the Russians are responsible for this.
Well, Chancellor Merz actually went on the record last night in a popular TV talk show with Karen Mioska, and he said that he assumes that the majority of the drones are by Russian actors, but there is always the possibility that you have I'm not sure what the English word is, Trittbrettfahrer, those who seek to cause harm by flying under the wings of
Right.
perceived
Those who
Russian
are sort
threat.
of jumping on, right, and sort of I'm blanking on the word as well. I will tell you, but yes, those who are sort of riding in the wake of the issue or the topic, and so there are others who might be involved as well, of course.
Yeah. And Minister of Defense Pistorius has urged people to remain calm, that they're looking into how to best address this challenge, but that it's important not to overreact, and that one of the aims of um, uh, bad faith actors are is, of course, to cause polarization, to cause fear and concern among the population, and so he urged Germans to stay calm and trust that this will be solved and addressed.
One of the other stories that's been unfolding that also has to do with defense and security has been the new Wehrdienstgesetz, or military service law, which was supposed to be discussed in the Bundestag this Thursday, but it's been postponed by a week, largely because the Christian Democrats have sort of put the brakes on and wanted to postpone the talks in the Bundestag. Can you tell us a little bit about what this new military service law is supposed to look like? Obviously, it's something that's hotly contested, but there's a strong sense that Germany needs a larger Bundeswehr, it needs a larger military. The defense minister, Boris Pistorius from the Social Democrats, is hoping that this can be a volunteer military. It's not going to be easy to change the rules around conscription in Germany, but that's something that's been debated and discussed as well.
So the central issue of dissent between Christian Democrats and Social Democrats is whether it should be a conscription, obligatory conscription, or whether this should be a voluntary service. And of course, there has been criticism from the younger generation against an obligatory conscription, saying that young people should be involved in the decision making that addresses their service and their lives. On the other hand, there are those who say that we're already in a situation that's where we're seeing regular security threats. Very few are calling it a war time scenario because, of course, thank God we're not quite there yet, but the threats are becoming more frequent, as we're currently seeing with the drones. And personally, I feel that it would be an important sign towards the younger generation and towards society as a whole to say, we are moving towards conscription, and we're also considering conscription for both young men and women, because for a conscription including women, the Grundgesetz, the Constitution would need to be changed. Conscription for men would be possible again, as Germany had it before, without any changes to the Grundgesetz. But I think it would be an important sign to increase the alertness and awareness among Germans that this is no longer the time of peace that we've gotten so used to over the past few decades, that everybody needs to make a contribution to keeping our country, to keeping Europe safe. And this does not necessarily need to look like, or should not actually look like the former military service that we used to have. But as we're seeing, the attacks and threats are becoming much more hybrid, so we need to actually rethink the entire concept of a military service and a service to the society.
I guess there are two follow-up things I'd like to ask you about. One is there's been a renewed discussion in sort of a sort of volunteer year, if you will, where one might serve in the military, but one might also serve in a hospital or an old age home or something like that, as was the case for those that did their Zivildienst or their civilian service in the past, and that this is something that many Germans feel Germany could benefit from by having young people spend sort of a social year. I think it'd be interesting to hear a little bit more from you about how that is resonating with people. But I guess the other thing is concretely in this case, there's been a real push by some to make sure that the questionnaire that should go out to all 18-year-old German men and women, but it's compulsory for men to fill out the form, but voluntary for women to fill out the form. Um, there's a push to get this out in January so that the Bundeswehr will be able to assess the individual's willingness and suitability to serve in the military so that those first conscripts could join in May of next year, right? There's a pretty tight timeline that's in place there. I think it would also be great to get your take on how realistic that is.
Well, that's one of the criticisms that the Democrats are putting forth. It's that Germany currently does not have the infrastructure to actually host and train all these conscripts. So they're calling for um, a voluntary military service, at least until Germany has built up the capacities to train in order to prevent circum conscription injustice from happening. So
Hmm.
uh, yes, the timeline is very ambitious. On the other hand, I think it's important to set an ambitious timeline because we've lost precious time, and the threats are becoming more frequent and more extensive. And I think now is the time to act. I think it's also an important signal to German society that that the government would send by calling conscripts. And as you mentioned, previously we used to have the opportunity to either do a military service or a social service, and I think that's an important option. I think it's important for young people to understand you're committing to 1 year of service to your society, be it in form of military service or by working, for example, in a retirement home, in a hospital, or contributing otherwise for young men and young women.
Hmm. Thank you. Thanks for that. So shifting gears a little bit, one of the other topics that has been on the agenda in recent weeks, but also takes on even importance because of tomorrow's date, October 7th, and the attack on Israel, is a question that someone just submitted on whether or on what role relations with Israel and the recent debate over recognition of Palestine by European allies of Germany are important to the current domestic debate in Germany, to current politics in Germany. How sort of how is the government responding? I think many of us know how Friedrich Merz has been responding, but how is this sort of being taken in the public as a whole?
Well, I think the most controversial issue that you could find in Germany with hardliners on both sides. And of course, it is absolutely essential for Germany to clearly stand on the side of the state of Israel. However, there has been a lot of criticism of how Netanyahu has been conducting politics before even the war in Gaza started. When we think back to reforms cutting down rule of law and limiting freedoms in Israel. So it's been quite challenging for Germany to find its line towards the war in Gaza. And when we think back to the UN General Assembly, where France and Saudi Arabia held a summit calling for a two-state solution, the German chancellor was not present at UNGA, and while this can of course be contributed to or attributed to the many pressing domestic matters, some also said that he 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 didn't go to New York in order to avoid being put on the spot on having to commit to whether or not he'd support a Palestinian state, as so many members of the European Union and now also G7 member countries have done. So that being said, at the moment, Foreign Minister Vadeful is in Qatar on his way to Israel and then to Egypt, where the negotiations about the Trump peace plan are being held, and the German government has issued its support for Trump's peace plan and urged Netanyahu to work with the parties on making this successful. And we're, of course, very much hoping that the hostages, after 2 years, will finally be freed. They're still being
Hmm.
held by Hamas.
Hmm. Um, Anya, as we start to sort of wrap up a little bit, I want to ask you about a recent trip that you took.
Yeah.
You were just in Saudi Arabia. I think if I remember correctly, this was the first time in over a decade that you had visited Saudi Arabia, and you had a little piece on LinkedIn about how your impression of Saudi Arabia has changed and evolved. Can you share with us sort of why you went there and what the purpose of the visit was? But then also what some of the high level takeaways are from your trip there. From
Yeah. So it was an amazing trip, and indeed, I hadn't been to Saudi Arabia for 12 years. So I was there mainly because the Munich Security Conference was holding a high-level meeting. They have a number of high-level meetings that they're holding in between the conferences that take place in February in Munich, and so it was, and I got to spend some time in the Saudi capital of Riyadh before going to that meeting, and it was amazing to see how Saudi Arabia has changed in the past 12 years. The Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has implemented a lot of policies that make Saudi society much more liberal. For example, women are now allowed to drive. I didn't need to wear the abaya. I was sitting in a single men zone without anyone caring that I was not supposed to be there. So you can feel that it's a much more liberal country than it used to be. However, you can also feel that there is still no freedom of opinion, no freedom of the press. The crackdown against anyone who criticizes the government is still there. There are many journalists or other activists in prison, and there are frequent executions of those who challenge the government. Then, speaking about the Munich leaders meeting in Al Ula. Al Ula is basically an oasis in the Saudi desert. And it saw a number of high-level representatives from throughout the regions, foreign ministers, ministers of defense, and the meeting was off the record, so unfortunately I can't share what was being discussed there. But what was evident was that the region is moving together much closer, and there was strong consensus that the Trump plan needed to be supported, that Hamas would not have support from anyone in the region, and that there is a strong wish for stability and peace in the region, including prospective cooperation with Israel.
how did that, how did your experience there, both at the Munich Security Conference meeting, but even before you got there, affect your take on foreign policy from Saudi Arabia? Have you seen sort of an evolution there as well? I mean, you talked a little bit about greater collaboration in the region, but are there any signs of a shift in foreign policy?
Yeah, and when you look back 10 years, the today's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was then Minister of Defense, and he started this. military intervention that we're still seeing playing out today in Yemen. And today he's taking a much more nuanced and balanced approach. He's very carefully trying to develop relations or at least détente with Iran. He's also thinking very strategically. He recently signed an agreement between a defense pact between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, and he's building relations with China. So you see that on a foreign policy level, he's also very carefully looking at how to make basically how to prepare the ground, how to create the environment in which his vision 2030 that he has formulated to move Saudi Arabia away from its dependency on oil income can blossom.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing these insights. Let me maybe come back to Germany with one final question, and that is, what are the things that you will be watching in the week ahead that you would recommend all of us to sort of keep on our radar and pay attention to? Are there any developments that you're watching closely that you think we would benefit from keeping an eye on?
Well, on Thursday, there will be the Autogipfel, so the summit on cars, which is of course a significant pillar for the German economy. And this is something that Karin Mioska in yesterday's talk show very much questioned Merz on. She said, "You promised the fall of reforms, and now it's fall, and we don't see reforms, and we've heard a lot of complaints from companies, from the industry, that the economic surge that Matt's promise isn't showing. So this will be one of the indicators how Germany can find basically its groove back to increase its sluggish economy after years of a drought. And of course, it's also important with regard to the role Germany is playing in Europe. The EU decided on the Verbrenner aus. I'm not quite sure what the combustion engine.
The combustion engine,
Yeah. And so, of course, there's in some parts of the German industry, there's a strong wish for canceling of this decision. It will show what role Germany is playing in Europe in causing disruption by questioning decisions that have been taken.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously a lot to watch when it comes to German economic policy, and the German economics minister, Katharina Reich, is under a lot of pressure there, as is the government as a whole. One of the pieces that I heard this morning on the radio focused on sort of support for old German industry, like the automotive sector and steel, and some frustration that there's not as much of an investment in the new technologies, right? That's an area where Germany needs to look as well. So it will certainly be interesting to see in this fall how Germany's industrial policy rolls out and whether this does become the fall of reforms.
Yeah.
Well, Anja, herzlichen Dank. It's always wonderful to speak with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you, Steve, for having me. It was my pleasure.